Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name's Julene Zirath. I'm a professor of physiology at the Karolinska Institutet. I'm a member of the Nobel Assembly and also a member of the Royal Swedish Academy. And I'm your host, your guide for this dialogue. And I want to start out by welcoming Serge Haroche. He is the 2012 Nobel laureate for physics. And he is here to have a dialogue with you all about digital well-being. And the dialogue we have today is going to be coupled to the Nobel Prize dialogue that will be held in Singapore, as you know. And the topic of that is the future we want together and how we can make a better future. What can we do to improve people's lives? What must we do next? And this will be a series of frank discussions. And so we're really going to, set the stage for that. And, we're delighted to have all of you. We know that you're, the best and the brightest of the, NUS, National University of Singapore. We have folks from Malaysia, Singapore, Japan, India, Philippines, Hong Kong, Thailand, Australia. And the way that we're going to work with this session is that we'll, have everybody use the hand function. So, if you know where that is on Zoom, we want you to, if you have a question or you want to make a comment, raise your hand. And the first time you're brought into the dialogue, I'd like you to introduce yourself briefly, say a little bit about where you're from, and then you can put your question out there. And we really would like a dialogue. And the topic we have is quite broad. I mean, digital well-being. So Serge, welcome. Really glad to see you again. And you've been given an enormously broad topic of digital well-being. And I wanted to, start out by giving you some opportunity to speak to the fellows here. What are your thoughts and what do you want? What do you expect out of the dialogue today?
I expect an exchange between students and me that is an exchange between generations. I think I am someone who have lived before the digital era, and I know what it was like before, how you could express your personality, what it meant to read a book on paper. And I think that the digital time have changed this by a large amount. It has changed our personal perception of the outside world. And it's interesting to share the experiences of people who have lived through this revolution, people who were born after this revolution happened, because I think it's one of the biggest revolution in technology since the invention of the book, the printing machine in the Middle Ages. And it has had a very, very big influence, a very big effect on our personalities, and human beings are perceiving the world around us. It's also very important for the sociological, political, and economical consequences of all this. And we might have to talk about that too. And there are some dangers, a lot of warnings about bad ways that the digital world can be used for. The connection with artificial intelligence, which is an important part of the digital world. So I think we can have topics for a very, very interesting discussion. I want to add that I am not at all a specialist of this. I am not working in this area. I don't know much more about social media and about informatics and about artificial intelligence than many of us. But of course, I have my personal opinions, and I would like to share it with the young students who are attending this session.
All right, well, that's great. I think I particularly like the idea of this generational aspect that you brought up. And I think we can learn a lot from each other across the spectrum. Life before internet, life while it's being evolved. And I don't know, will there be a life after internet? Probably not. But okay, so I really want to have an active dialogue with the fellows and the students, mid-career investigators. So please don't hesitate. Put your hands up if you have questions. We've sort of framed the dialogue. There's a lot we can cover under that, but also outside of that topic as well. Serge, do you have Twitter?
No, I don't want to have it.
Why not?
Yes, I have things to say about that. too. But
well, I'll
I'm
start with the
waiting
first
for-
question. What would you like to say about that? The kind of idea of having Twitter and Facebook and all these other ways of communicating across these digital platforms.
I think it's great to be able to communicate, but we should not forget that, in fact, we are also manipulated with all these technologies. And this manipulation is not innocent. All these social media want us to be a kind of to be exploited. In fact, all the information we give to these media is part of the market that they are using. And this may have some bad effects, and we might talk about that too.
Who's going to dive in with the first question or comment? Otherwise, I may have to take the chair's prerogative and pull people in. So go ahead, Zhang. I noticed you were nodding a lot when Serge was talking about social media. So is it Zhang Hong? Few words about yourself
hi.
and then your question, Zhang. Hi, welcome.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Zheng Hong. I am a medical student from Singapore. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here with all of you. So yeah, I was nodding a lot because actually it was one of the questions that I had, one of the primary questions that I had going into this dialogue. It was about how, as Serge mentioned, there's a lot of manipulation and misinformation that can go on in the digital sphere. But at the same time, I think right now, which is relevant to everyone, I think there's also been sort of a war on the democratic internet. So across many different countries, there's been increasing regulation of the internet. So for example, there's the Great Firewall in China. There's also been like internet shutdowns in countries like India, for example. At the same time, there's always been sort of like an aspiration to make the internet as democratic as possible. So for example, you mentioned Twitter, right, which started off as sort of a very unregulated platform, which allowed for the sharing of a lot of information, for example, during the Arab Spring. So I was wondering, what do you think about how regulated the internet should be, and whether we should be aiming to promote a more increasingly open sort of access to internet? Yeah.
I think what we have seen recently is the use of the internet to propagate fake news, to propagate hatred, opinions, and to manipulate people. And I think things have to be done against that. But of course, paradoxically, one wants also to preserve the freedom of the internet, and we have to be able to balance this. But I think one of the aspects that people have been discussing is whether the internet should remain anonymous, whether people who publish things on the internet should identify themselves. And my personal opinion is that yes, one should suppress the complete protection of people get through anonymous writing and through anonymous opinions, and they should take responsibility for what they say on the internet. I think this is the first step before you put censorship, before you try to regulate things. You should suppress this anonymousness. I also think that another point which is very bad is the existence of robots, people who publication on the internet of opinions or statements by machines, which just manipulate people. And this has also, I think, has to be controlled. People have called these the kind of dead souls of the internet. Opinions which are given not by human beings who are responsible for what they say, but by dead souls. I don't know how to say that otherwise, who propagate false news and who completely change the spirit of what human communication should be between people. So, but I think it's a very difficult task. But my point of view is that the first step is to suppress the anonymous character of the communication by the internet. I don't know what the young people think about that.
Well, we can discuss that a little bit. I mean, it says something about philosophically about us as human beings. I mean, if the presumption is that if we're anonymous, we'll say anything, and we may not stand behind it. But if we stand behind it with our names or our identities, we'll be much more, maybe more honest and more reserved. And we can discuss how that affects us as human beings in society as well. Amani, why don't you, a few words about yourself and then jump in with your comment or question, and let's have a dialogue.
Hello, I am Amani. I'm a medical student from Australia as well. And my comment was trailing from Zhang's comment. So when he said, should the internet be more regulated? I thought, who should be responsible in regulating the internet? Because if we see in, for example, Instagram, the biggest platform, we can see how Instagram actually oppresses certain issues, certain viewpoints from certain people. The biggest example will be how Palestinians and the news from Palestine actually is suppressed by Instagram. So that's how they regulate the platform. So how do we actually want the platform to be? I guess that's the question I'm trying to get at.
I mean, that, and Serge, I mean, any thoughts on that? I mean, obviously, Serge, we all know that that's not your primary expertise. You're a physicist, but the question might be, from your perspective, how would one want to kind of censor or regulate or govern this space?
I think there are two levels. These social media are private companies. So the first responsibility is for them to regulate against hatred, statements against discriminations, about all kinds of bad things which can be propagated through anonymous writing. And then at the second level, and if they censor some statements, this is their responsibility as a private company, and the followers, the people who are registered in these companies, are always free to leave them. And so in a free society, if you do not agree with the kind of regulation which is put by these companies, you are free to leave. You have to exercise your freedom. And I think one of the difficulties of the internet is that a lot of people are hooked to the system by kind of addiction, and they cannot leave, and they are, so to speak, captive of the system. But in principle, they are free to leave. And if, and at a second level, of course, if what is propagated by these platforms, by these social media, is against the law, is propagating blatantly false or hatred information, then the justice of the different countries has to intervene. So my feeling is that there is a first filter, which is the free will of people to belong or not to the system. And the second level is, of course, the justice, which is a prerogative of states. But of course, then you have also to find out whether the state which is supposed to exercise justice is free and democratic or not. And you have the influence of political powers on the internet, which is also a very important topic that we might have to discuss. So it's a very complex situation.
But you know, you make an interesting point that we're sort of all a part of this because we choose to be actors. And so there's also a personal responsibility to enable this to continue. And we as citizens probably have a great role in being able to help regulate this to some degree. I cannot pronounce all names well. So Aksui, how could I say your name properly?
Aksa.
Aksa, okay,
Yes.
welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Aksa Shafiq, and thank you for inviting me here. One thing that I want to say is a comment, and maybe it can be something that we can use in future. I do not know about all other organizations or all other fields that may have organizations that actually create standards or give them regulations to work on. For example, in medical or in our medical or healthcare situation, we have organizations like WFME, World Federation of Medical Education, or that we have other organizations like WHO or
We just lost you for a second, so the internet wasn't so stable. But you're talking about having guidelines and maybe codes of conduct.
Yes, exactly. So maybe having those for social media, digital well-being, or digital stances that IT companies or IT organizations will be taking in future as a global stance, as a global standardized stance, would be something that we can look forward to in future. But the initiative has to come from somewhere. And the question that I have for Sir Serge is that, sir, you talked about manipulation, human manipulation by digital media. To what extent do you think is this dangerous, and to what extent do you see it affecting us as human beings in future?
This is a very important, very wide question. I think it's a big danger because all these social media are using algorithms which are not neutral. They want us to be interested in some topics. They find out what our interests are, and they are manipulating us in the sense that they are trying to expose us to things that they found will interest us for economical reasons, because they want us to buy things, but also to get information about us, information which could be used in different ways. We heard, for instance, about the intervention of some countries in the free elections in other countries by trying to manipulate the electors, by manipulating the citizens. This is a very important part of it. I also heard that some big social media are using different algorithms depending upon the part of the world of the young people they are addressing. For example, TikTok is not using the same algorithm in Europe than it is doing in Asia. So there is a kind of will to influence the way people think in different parts of the world, depending upon kind of ideologies. And I think this is insidious, and this is very important because we don't know that we feel that we are free, that we are consumers who have a free will, but partly we are not consumers. We are the things which is being consumed. Our intelligence, our brains are being used by the system. So it might sound paranoid what I say, but I think it's part of the truth of social media. We are immersed in a system which is a very big and very large enterprise. I also want to say that before the internet, we were free to think slowly. When we wanted to create something, when we wanted to write something, we have the free time to think about it at leisure. Now with the internet, everything is accelerated. We get a huge amount of information. We are asked to be multitask. We can do many things at the same time. For instance, now I am on Zoom with you, but if I receive a phone call, I can answer it at the same time, which was not the same before. So the fact that we are pushed into a system which accelerates everything and which forbids us to take the time for reflection is something also very important.
One thing I want to just make a comment on, and partly because of what I just heard now, and maybe this happens and I'm ignorant, but do many of the social media platforms have accreditation? You know, so sometimes you have different agencies where they have like a gold star, and you know that they meet certain criteria and you feel like they have an accreditation, and there's some, I don't want to use the word watchdog, but do social media have sort of accreditations for scores on ethics and transparency, etc.? If not, maybe that's a system one should promote.
Yeah. No, I don't know about that. I doubt it, but.
Okay. Well, let's move on to, is it Trang?
Yes, correct.
Hi.
Hi. Can I just respond to the first question and
Sure,
then
yeah.
Okay. But I'll introduce myself a little bit. So my name is Chang, and I'm zooming from Hanoi. I'm a social entrepreneur on online education, and as well as a writer on various issues. So my response to the first questions, we are far from fully safe in all environments. Even wolves have ears, so do Zoom and other platforms. And I think that based on my experiences as an intercultural trainer, I believe that, of course, we are all equal, but we are far from equal when it comes to freedom of internet and the freedom of expression. So my tip is that I always encourage my friends, peers to equip themselves with intercultural sensitivities. So even on virtual platforms, even though I'm full of curiosities about you, there are some certain issues that I will not ask you. Not because I don't dare to ask these questions, not because I don't dare to discuss, but because I care about you, your safety, and your willingness to discuss. So I think, intercultural sensitivities are key to our actually active and constructive participations in our virtual platforms and open spaces. Okay, so my questions. So first of all, when we talk about digital well-being, oftentimes we mention moderate or reasonable use of internet and online channels. However, how do we define overuse or underuse?
I was going to ask you what's moderate and what's reasonable, because those are also vague terms.
The thing is that, I found this term in all the handbooks or toolkits related to digital well-being, and I'm very confused about that. And my second question, the internet actually has opened our mind and our heart. And thanks to the internet, we get access to stories about different parts of the world, and especially regarding the vulnerable populations whose stories are often not very heard. But I have one challenge. Whenever I read those stories, I feel very emotionally exhausted. And then it also in turn affects my well-being. Well, on the one hand, I want to be, empathic. And on the other hand, I'm also emotionally exhausted. So my question is, how do you regulate that? And do you have any advice for us? And I'm not just asking Serge, but also like all the participants in the room. Thank you.
So I think your question is more related to a consumer and the inputs and the stimulation you take in. And
that's true.
The stories that you absorb.
Yeah.
Online.
And maybe you get access to more and more diversity because of the internet brings you that. And then that affects you very differently. So Serge, maybe thoughts about that?
I think you asked a very interesting question. First of all, when you say what is the definition of a moderate use of the internet, I think I can give an answer, for example, for children or teenagers. The fact to be many, many hours a day on the internet is not moderate use. And there is a very good illustration of that point. I think the CEOs of the big companies, Google, Facebook, or Microsoft, forbid their children to be in front of screens. They know exactly how bad it is, and they educate their own children to be aware of that and not to use this system. I have seen interviews of some of them, and it's quite clear. Just to make a metaphor which might be excessive but a little bit provocative, drug dealers ask their children not to use drugs. And I think it's the same for the internet. Moderate use is that. Now, the fact that of course, we are all, from the beginning, we have said negative things about the internet, and I want to say some positive things. We get a huge amount of information from all over the world. The fact that we are able now to talk together, separated by thousands of kilometers and exchanging our ideas is a positive point. And the fact that you are exposed to the lives of people in other countries is also positive. But of course, you have to protect your own sensitivity from that. And this is your personal responsibility to protect yourself. You don't have to let all the news have access to you all the time, because as you said, this might be depressing, this might be too much to support and to wear. And you have to cut yourself from the internet when you have this kind of feeling. We are living now in a very bad time, geopolitically speaking. We have, for the first time since for the last 70 or 80 years, we have war inside Europe. So I'm talking to you here as a European. And I am overwhelmed by the news that I see every day. And myself and my wife, we are protecting ourselves from that from time to time when it is too strong to bear on a daily basis. I think one point about the internet is that it's a system which might be overwhelming. not only for political reasons, but for all kinds of reasons. And you have to know how to protect yourself from that, to be able to develop your own personality, your own feelings outside the internet. And I can tell you it's possible. Before the internet, we are forced to do that. And you have to do that to remain human beings.
But you're right. There's a lot of really good things that have come. And I mean, access to knowledge,
Yes.
tools to be able to take some of the tedious parts of the job and make them more easy, bearable.
Yes.
So there's a lot of positives that we have in front of us too. I'm writing a manuscript for my research team right now, and just the whole idea of being able to pull down references into a reference handling program to be able to modify my manuscripts means that I can have a little more time to think about the science and not maybe the secretarial job around putting a paper together. So there's a lot of good things that come out of it as well.
Yeah, if you can use the time you save for leisure, for thinking, for reflection, but unfortunately, most of the time you save by doing that is taken by other parts of the digital world, and like a lot of mails that you didn't have before, a lot of solicitation from outside. So you have to be able to protect yourself, to take the good part of the digital world and to use the free time you get to go away from it.
True, absolutely. Okay, Wharton, welcome to the conversation.
Hi, my name is Wharton. I'm originally from Hong Kong, and currently I'm a PhD and a medical student in Singapore. And I work in bioinformatics and immunology, and I work with bats as well. So that's quite interesting. Yeah. So I have 3 points really. One on a humanitarian standpoint, one on a technological standpoint, and then lastly on a medical standpoint as well. So on the humanitarian standpoint, we actually, I see this as a dilemma of some sorts, because we use internet to be increasingly interconnected, and it is really quite a miracle to be having this conversation across Europe to Asia, for example. However, we are also living in a world where each country has different values, each country has different rules and regulations as well. So going back to the point of where the regulation comes from, where the body of the regulation comes in, like, is there United Nations for internet, for example, and how would that go about? And a lot of the terms that we have juggled so far, it's, whether we like it or not, it's kind of Western constructs, democracy, free speech. I did my first degree in Britain, so those are very familiar to me, but I do see that there's a different point of view because it's for example, what happened in Hong Kong. We are going through a transition, and obviously there we have huge connections with China as well. So to that point, the internet can be regulated and used in different ways. And whether we want the free speech, whether we want democracy in internet, it's can be in different flavors in different parts of the world. So that's my first comment. And then onto the technological standpoint, actually the true democracy is not regulation. It's, for example, blockchain technology. Cryptocurrency is the hype, right? But that really is the decentralization and letting people in different parts of the internet do the regulation to deregulate the whole issue. So that is something we are seeing increasingly, that different terminals, different machines in different parts of the world are getting to really use the internet in a more decentralized way. So that's the second point. And with regards to health, I think this is very interesting, because if there's anything that we really can regulate, it's how these private companies create software where we can actually go do benchmarking to see whether they activate our dopamine circuits, for example. So how much the degree of addiction we're having from these software, and whether these algorithms can be regulated so that we don't have this kind of addiction, but still can use it in an appropriate manner. So yes, those are my few points.
Serge, there's a lot for you to grab onto there.
Yes, I think you summarized very well the problems and the paradox of the internet. We live in a complex world. It's clear that different parts of the world have different cultures and have different opinions of what the freedom and democracy should be. And also that the internet companies are free to develop algorithms which are not neutral. maybe one solution to part of your problem would be to force, I am just thinking about, to force all the companies, all the social media to publish their algorithms, so we know exactly what kind of manipulation they are trying to do. One of this, you mentioned the Bitcoins. I have another example of the what I think is a misuse of the internet. It's instant trading. The fact that now on the stock market, you can sell or buy literally at the microsecond or nanosecond level. So that the trading companies have to be close to the trade market, because even the time it takes for information to propagate at the speed of light might be too long for them to compete. And there is a lot, I heard that there is a lot of tricks which are used. For instance, you decide to buy something, and a microsecond later you cancel your order. And during this microsecond, you have manipulated the market because you have made an offer, so the price have increased, and then you can make a lot of profit. So this is a use of the internet, which is not what we say, what the common wisdom is that the free market is good because it answers the rule of the supply and demand, and it's good for economy. But this kind of trading is not made for the good of economy. It's made just for short-term financial gain, and I think it's a misuse of the internet, and this could be regulated. For instance, you could decide, and I don't think it will be done, you could decide that any trading which is done at this level should be taxed. For example, 1% tax, then it would make it completely, it will damp it completely because it would not be profitable again. So you need, this kind of decision could be made. Unfortunately, they are not made because there is a lot of interest against it, because there is a lot of competition, and because there is a lot of conflict between different countries. But I think this is something which should be addressed.
Morton, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so I agree with that, and in the sense that there's definitely regulation that we can have, and I think having the code to be open source is definitely one way to go about it. What I think we can do further is to really test whether these algorithms have impact in health. And if we can do clinical trials on drugs and medical devices, why can't we do it for software?
Yeah. Good point. Okay, Anne, I'm going to let you in. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Anna. I'm from Indonesia and I'm a medical student. And I'm really grateful to be here with you guys today. And I think, as we know before, one of the major negative impacts of internet and social media is addiction and mental health issues. And if we can't regulate the use, we also can focus on the health of the individual itself. For example, we can develop a solution to early detect addiction and mental health. But unfortunately, not many people are aware of their own condition from the start. So when they seek medical help, their condition is already severe. And I have read some literatures, and the potential solution for this is diagnostic artificial intelligence, such as passive sensing through mobile phone. So we can detect symptoms of depression or internet addiction by passively collecting data from the mobile phone. For example, we can collect audio from the phone, that then it will be analyzed to see if someone has a certain vocal articulation and speech patterns that are the symptoms of depression. If the artificial intelligence successfully detects it, then it will notify the user and help them to seek early medical care. And my question is this really feasible if we look from the physics aspect? And what do you think about it? Will it solve the problem or just add another problem such as ethical issues, because collecting audio can violate someone's privacy?
Really interesting. Yeah, the whole question you raise is really, really interesting. So Serge, any thoughts about that? And I guess, can physics be helpful here?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think you gave yourself the answer when you said that it might be counter ethical ideas against the fact that your medical condition should not be studied in this way. If you do the metaphor with drugs, you can also say that if someone is a drug addict, he could take his own blood sample and find out that he is addicted, and then ask for help. So I think we are talking here about the personal responsibility, the fact that we, as a citizen, as a human being, we should at some point understand what is good or bad for our own condition. But maybe what you said, to have on the smartphone a kind of alert telling us you have spent too much time on the internet today, and I think this happens. I get every day, I get a notification saying how much time I've spent on my screen. This is part of the thing, but at some point, the person should himself or herself decide to ask for help or not. That's my opinion.
But I guess there really are a lot of people in the healthcare profession thinking about how we can use AI and how we can basically use these other means to help improve our well-being and capture information. And I guess the point is that there's probably a limit on how much of that information should be captured. Is that what you're suggesting, Serge?
My worry is that we have opened a kind of Pandora box. So we are letting artificial intelligence to control our lives to a very large extent because of all these possibilities. And this changes what it means to be a human being progressively and insidiously. And I am worried about that.
Okay, good point. Okay, well, Mike, you're next. Welcome, Mike.
Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm Mike. I'm from the Philippines. I'm an instructor. I'm teaching in here there's around 70 to 80 million Filipinos who has an account in social media across Facebook, Instagram, and that's the reason why Elon Musk, the Starlink, first in Asia, there will be the first satellite that will be placed up above in our country, and that's because of data mining. And with regards to that, I can actually relate and confirm to the sharing of everyone when it comes to artificial intelligence and the socio-technical issues that we experience.
All right, and you then said you would like to enter the discussion after people have asked questions. So
yeah, I'll reserve my question later. Thank
all right,
you.
fine. Okay, Mike, thanks a lot. Ming.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Julian, for moderating the conversation, and hi, Serge, for inviting me. To briefly introduce myself, I'm Ming, and I'm a medical student from Malaysia. And yeah, so I would like to take some brief comments on like what Mike have just said on the access of internet and social media among children. Like when I was in the pediatrics posting around the hospitals, we see impatient children running around, and then we will witness their parents giving them phones to live with peace, you know. So, and also besides that, when also in the cafeteria, our hospital cafeteria, we also witnessed this similar situation. Besides that, besides using these types of digital apps where we can see like how much of time being spent on social media, and you can compare it with how much productive work that we have done. Like I would like to ask Serge, like how would you like to have a social support or a habit formation to really understand more about the usage of social media in children?
I think it's a very important point. I think that as I said already, the children spend too much time on social media. Their attention is distracted, I would say, too much at the time when you have to learn and to get acquainted with the world outside. A young child, a baby or a young child has to make his own experience of the real world. And the fact that he's always exposed to images, to movies, and to virtual reality is something I think which is very bad. And I think the first thing which has to be done is to make the parents aware of that. And of course, it is difficult because, as you said, parents often use this as a way to be able to have the children quiet when they are doing other things. And the internet is a kind of babysitting for the children, and it's a very dangerous babysitting. And as I said before, one example of that is the fact that the people who know well about the internet. The leaders of the big social media companies are protecting their own children from this and educate them at the same time that all schools are trying to get as much as digital media, digital hardware as they can, having computers on all desks. The people who rule these companies are protecting their own children from the screen. So I think this is something which has to be taken into account. My feeling is that to get an education, to be trained, young children have to be able to focus their attention. And we live in a world where focusing one's attention is becoming more and more difficult because we are subjected to a huge amount of unfiltered information. And this is true. It's most dangerous for the children who have to form their own personality, who have to build their own self. And I think you are right that one should do something against that, but this comes, I think, first through the education of the parents themselves. And the parents are living in the same world. I think it's as bad to see a young child on the internet as to see a young child near his father or his mother, while the father and the mother are all the time answering to solicitation on the internet on their own cell phone, on their own computer, and not listening to their children. The attention given to children by the parents is essential, and protecting them from the internet is an essential aspect of that.
This is just a side comment, but related to this, I'm thinking about the pandemic and how many people who've been working from home, and many times they've had kids working from home while they're working from home. In the last 2 years, people have basically been sitting next to each other, looking in their computer screens, and there's whole family systems have been stuck around that because we've been sort of forced to be bringing home work into our homes, and work never stops. And in that respect, I think this kind of barrage of information has been even greater during the period of being isolated with COVID. That's my own personal opinion in this context. And I think it's affected kids as well. I'm kind of linking back to the comments that Ming had and Mike had about the interactions with young people.
It's Pai here.
Hi, Pai.
So to introduce briefly about myself, my name is Pai. I'm a medical doctor by training. So I recently completed my master's degree from the National University of Singapore. I have some years of working experiences in non-governmental organization. So I'd like to take this opportunity to ask a follow-up question since Serge mentioned about the AI. So the question is related to the futures of digital health. So how do you foresee the futures of digital health, telemedicine, and the use of artificial intelligence in the healthcare? I think healthcare is expensive. So using technology will help us to reduce the cost, and that would improve the financial well-being of the patients. And there's always limited human resources in the healthcare sector. So using technology may reduce the burdens on the doctor and nurses. So that would improve the well-being of the healthcare professional. These are all good. But however, this is my second part of the questions is in the future, do you think doctor and nurses may lose their job as the AI is replacing them in diagnosis and giving prescription?
First of all, I think as a medical doctor, you know much more than I do about all this. I could say first that certainly the use of artificial intelligence, which can accumulate a huge amount of data to make a diagnosis, is something which will help doctors very much. And I don't think it will replace doctors, but doctors should use and are using that. And that's a fantastic help for diagnosis. It might also be a help for surgery. In real time, artificial intelligence can certainly help making decisions in urgent times. And but my view, maybe because I am a humanist, is that the doctor will never be suppressed by that, and you will need to have someone making a human decision in the end either following what the artificial intelligence is saying or taking over. So this part of healthcare, the fact that it might jeopardize the work of doctors, I don't think so. I think we need more and more doctors in some part of the world, and so that's not an issue. I also think that healthcare at another level, the nurses and is a very important part of the healthcare, and this cannot be made by a machine. This will have to be done by people, because there is a connection, a human connection between the patient and the healthcare people, who cannot be replaced by machines. And if you replace that by machines, you get in a very bad situation. I can again take an example from the recent COVID situation, when during 1 year in 2020, sick people in the hospital were cut off human relations. They could not see their own family. They could not see their close people, and they were only exposed to technical help. And this raised very important issues, and it was a very hard time for them. So I think the human nature of healthcare is something which will never be replaced by machines or by artificial intelligence. Again, as for all the other issues that we address today, there is a balance to find between technology and between humanity, and this is the case. And in the case of healthcare and the medical assistance, this is of course a very important issue.
I think the human elements in healthcare are really, really quite profound. I think they're quite big, the compassion, all of the aspects related to that. Let me go back up to, is it Akshay again? Hi.
Thank you, Julian. Okay, so I have a couple of points that I will try to make precise and certain in an order. Number one, since I'm from Pakistan, I believe in this pandemic, Pakistan soared, I would say, in regards to social media. It might have been 10 years back if this pandemic had not occurred, because it made us do things fast to be able to deal with social media and to be able to deal with health education, schooling, and other things to space up with the pandemic and staying home. So one thing I would like to ask Serge is that you have been in the era when everything was local. But today, when I work in organizations and I work on ground, I believe we go more and more towards global, to being global, to working globally, to accessing globally, to being intercultural globally. So do we need to step back and see things on a local level first and understand them and amend them there, so that we are better able to deal globally, especially in the field of digital well-being? This is one question. The second is, just like Sir Serge mentioned, that the people who are working in media, digital well-being, or any creating internet or devices or AI solutions or innovations, they don't let their children use these things. They do try to make things for us as well, like digital well-being apps, which help us not use a lot of digital devices for long times. But is there a research being done by them? Because at least in Pakistan, a doctor, an engineer, or someone who's a mathematician or someone who's a physicist does need to do research, does need to have certain number of researchers by the time they become an associate professor or an assistant professor or become an HOD in a department, or to go on a higher level of education or teaching or learning. But do software developers have to have those researchers? And who researches for these softwares then? This is my second question. And who would take the liability for that? The third question from
wait,
my side.
Wait, it's too many questions.
Okay.
So actually, because it's really hard to answer when and they're all very different and all really important. So the first question, I think let's start with that one. And that was really rather have a global perspective versus a local perspective. And maybe you can comment on that one first, Serge.
If I understand well, this question was raised in the context of the pandemics and the health issues, and how do you need to have a global or a local answer to these issues. I think you need a mix of both. I think the global answer is useful because it lets you know how different countries react to the situation and allows you to have a reflection about that. It's clear that the different countries, for example, in the case of the pandemic, have decided, some countries have decided to lock down completely and to try to eradicate the COVID, and other countries have decided to live with it. And I think as a citizen of the world, I was very much interested by reading what different countries were doing at some time, and to get to form my own opinion. For instance, since Julien, you are from Sweden, and I was intrigued at the beginning by the fact that Sweden was taking a more relaxed attitude with this. And after a while, I realized that the result was about the same. And so it was an interesting reflection, and I think it was important. Now, on the local, it's also important to have a local discussion, because the way you react and the way you protect yourself against illness and against a pandemic depends upon your culture, depends upon your way, the habits of life, and then local responses are important. But what is essential, again, in this case, is to be immune from fake news, from all this nonsense which we have seen during the pandemic about the harm that the vaccines were doing, the fact that people should not get vaccines, and the fact that a lot of false information were propagated through the internet. So here again, if you take a global view, maybe you can be protected against that more than if you rely just on local social media.
And I think the second question was really, how do you kind of judge the content creators and the opinion leaders in that space? And I suppose in the academic world, we sort of have this, people are assistant professors, associate professors, there's sort of criteria that people need to sort of achieve to access to the next level. And I guess your question was related to how do we get a certificate of good faith in the people who are providing content and infrastructure for us? And that was sort of the question there.
Yeah, this is, I don't have a specific answer, but I think this is difficult. But again, I think you can exercise your own critical judgment. If you don't like what the social media is doing, just get out of it.
And actually understand that it's okay to do that. Listen, I want to move on to Zen real quick, and I can come back to you if we have time, but I want to try to get everybody in. So go ahead, Zhang.
Hi. Yeah. Hi. So thank you so much for everything that you've shared so far. So I just wanted to make two quick comments. Firstly, on the topic of overuse of technology in children, because that's something that I'm quite passionate about, and I also did some work in. So I think it's been increasingly recognized as a public health issue, how screen addiction affects children's developments, like socially, even cognitively, for example, like language delay, etc. So I think there has been increasing recognition amongst medical professionals. For example, in Singapore, I was doing a project on raising awareness on this issue with a pediatrician, and she's also part of a Ministry of Health task force on writing new guidelines on screen use for children in Singapore. And we've also worked with some other countries within Asia. So for example, like Philippines and Thailand and Hong Kong. And they mentioned how there has also been increasing recognition, and we feel that there is some hope for this issue, and we are really hoping to see some improvement. Yeah, so I just wanted to make that comment, so it's a bit more hopeful. And secondly, I also wanted to go back to what Anna has mentioned earlier about the possibility of using AI diagnostics through your mobile phone. And I think my question, everyone has already said that there's a lot of benefits to digital technologies in healthcare, obviously, but there's also a lot of dangers, such as the danger of data mining by these private companies. So I was just thinking about this quote by Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, who said that he actually wants to make Apple the legacy of Apple will be in healthcare, which was what he said. And I thought that was really interesting. And I'm just wondering, what do you see is the role of private companies in digital health in the future? Thank you.
I think you know much more than I do on these topics. On the first topic about studying the influence of the digital world on children and the fact that steps can be taken to improve the situation, I am glad to hear that, and I think it's very important. Now, what private companies can do for helping developing new ways to cure people, I think it's also very important. We need that not only in the digital world, but we need that also in all other parts of medicine. We need private companies to develop new tools for surgery. And I have experienced this myself. I think it's wonderful that you get a lot of applied research done by private companies to do that. And I think this is a positive aspect of the digital world, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of health, I think for, children with diabetes, if you have a wearable device that monitors glucose and maybe an insulin pump and how that can even be linked into the parent's phone. So if a child has a hypoglycemic event, that could be really important. And these are things that are probably low-hanging fruits in terms of how you can help better manage people's health care. So certainly some of these advances are going to be life-saving for people as well. I want to make sure, is it Kwan? You haven't had your hand up at all. Maybe I can let you in. I sent you a little direct message too to try to encourage you. Do you have a comment or question you want to add to the dialogue before I move to Wharton?
Sorry, I was more of a listener than talking about. Actually, I want to ask Professor Haroche about online trolling. The internet is giving us a lot of interesting thing, a lot of good things, but it also gives us more ways to be giving hatred, especially online trolls. So, essentially, if there are any certain topic in Facebook, in Instagram, and Twitter, you will obviously find some comment that particularly to me is just disgusting and just scare the hell out of me. So I want to ask Mr. Haroche particularly, have you ever experienced some kind of trolling, some kind of hatred in your person, in your family, in the matter, and in your work in science, especially physics? So I want to know more about that, because science, people say in my city in Hanoi, they do not experience that much of hatred. So I want to know about more than in everywhere else.
All right, so this question's related to mobbing, I guess. People who might harass you or mob you through social media. And given that you're not on, I suppose you have to participate in these platforms in order to notice that you're being mobbed. But it is a question that people do experience that, harassment and mobbing on social media. And his question was, have you experienced that? And perhaps if you have, how have you dealt with it?
No, personally, since I told you I am not on social media, partly for this reason, so I never experienced that directly from the social media. It has happened sometimes that I got, for example, an interview on television or on a broadcasting station, and that some people did not like what I said. So I got then emails, and I don't know how they got my email address in the first place, which were not very pleasant, but it was not mobbing and it was not very serious. So I protected myself from that. But again, I understand that it's a big issue. And since we are talking about children, there have been a lot of news in France, and I think everywhere in the world, saying that this kind of mobbing, bullying on the internet is devastating for children. And it's a part of the problem that we did not address up to now, but there have been children killing themselves after having been harassed on the internet, and this is absolutely unbelievable. So this is an issue, but not for me. And I think it has to be addressed.
Absolutely. Wharton, I'm going to let you in. I think maybe you want to comment to something that's been previously said, perhaps, or maybe you have a new point of entry here into the dialogue.
Yeah, so I want to comment on firstly on Pai's point on the the replacement of medical professionals with machines and AI, right? There's actually a very gaping hole that cannot be filled, which is actually the medical legal side of things. So I mean, most of the healthcare professionals in this dialogue, we know that there's always this automated diagnosis on an ECG that we ignore, and we will always look at the trace on our own. So and yes, there can be image analysis to histology slides to X-rays, but in the end, there will always be people who sign off and take liability for our patients. So in that regard, I don't think healthcare professionals can be replaced so easily. But whereas AI can actually be very important tools to help us accelerate and also confirm our diagnosis that we can miss by the human eye. One of the things that I wanted to touch on was a new thing really is actually the use of data and also data privacy and more importantly, data justice. So I work in genetics a lot, and in the early parts of human genetics, most of the data was from the Western part of the world. And now we're catching up on the other parts of the world. And you know, to accelerate precision medicine, we really need these databases. So how do we adjust for this justice in the biasness of the data in different populations, for example? And how do we use this data and collect and safeguard them? So Serge, perhaps if you have any comments on how we make this data free and available, but at the same time, make it really globally accessible to all kinds of different populations and audience.
I think you know the topic very well and much better than I can. But I think what you say is it's a part of scientific research. I think all the data you can get about the genome of humanity, and not only in some part of the world, but everywhere in the world, is something which will help and it should be essential for researchers all over the world. And my deep feeling is that scientific research is a global activity which has no boundaries, and we need to have this data available for all people. So my feeling is that everything should be done for this data to be first collected everywhere and to be available for all people, as a scientist and not as a physician. This is my opinion.
Okay, Bonnie.
The conversation is getting really interesting, and I would like to talk about two things that I feel strongly about, which is firstly the diagnostic AI, and I think Wharton and everyone else had already explained a lot about it, so I will talk only a little bit about it. So I feel strongly that clinical medicine can never be replaced by AI, because the doctor-patient relationship is essential in achieving a diagnosis. If you want to diagnose a lesion, for example, you need to do the neurological exam where you have to actually touch the patient and you see for the signs. So that's why I feel like doctors will never be replaced, but AI can supplement what we currently have and make things better. The second point I actually wanted to talk about is a more personal question. So Serge, if you could give advice to someone, at what age would you recommend their child to be exposed to technology? Because it's hard. In primary school, they make iPads mandatory and all. So what is your opinion on introducing technology to children?
When my children were young, there was no digital world, so I did not have to address this issue to answer this question. But now I have my grandchildren. For my grandchildren, this problem is an important one. I think it's difficult to cut teenagers, I would say children who are 12 or 13 years or above, from the internet, because it has become part of the life of society at large. So my point of view is that they should be introduced to the internet at this age, but as not before, and they should be protected against cell phones and from the internet when they are young in elementary school, because elementary school is a time when they have to get to be trained to how to read and how to compute and how to make their own reflection and vision of the world. And for that, they need to be in contact with the real world. So I would be very protective of the children at this early age. Now, starting when they are 11, 12, or 13 years old, they should be progressively introduced, but with safeguards, with protection against some access to some sites, and progressively they should be able to do that. And I think also the people, the social medias are using, and the other children, the other people they are able to get in touch with should also be controlled by the parents. But I think this is just common wisdom, I think.
You know, you said something earlier that I really liked, and it was something to the effect of young people need to be allowed the space to find and develop their own unique personality and experience the world on their own. Maybe you can rephrase that again, because I thought that was just so nicely said.
Yeah, I think it's important for when a baby or a young child is exposed to the world, he has to see the difference, to see the boundary between his own self and the outside world. And he has to understand the world of objects, the world of other people around him, and the real world to get a good communication with other people. And I think that an abusive use of the social media, of the internet, and of images, and to be exposed to images all the time is something which, in my view, is really bad and dangerous. And I'm sure that I know that sociologists and anthropologists are making a lot of studies about that. My wife is an anthropologist, and she's very sensitive to that issue, and we are always very often discussing about that. Psychoanalysts, children's psychologists have been studying that in depth, and I think it's a very important issue. We have to make sure that we don't change the personality and the way children relate to reality, and the way children exercise their imagination and their creativity by putting them too early in the world of the internet.
Maybe with that, I'll let Ming in, because you're thinking a lot about pediatrics and young people.
Thanks, Julene. So actually, I would like to provide some perspective as a digital student. So like we as university students, our first encounter with university is often online, like registering for courses, and also like when we get our class schedules. However, not everyone and all students thrive in digital spaces because of the way we interact with technology. Like, for example, everyone has witnessed the black swan of the COVID-19, where online classes were preferred over physical classes. And we see students switching off their cameras during Zoom sessions. And also we are left to our own devices during the so-called quarantine session. And also in the academic setting, we witnessed like students emailing their professors and lecturers earlier to say that, hey, I need this lecture slide earlier so that I can get a better mark in my exam. And also, like, I would like to ask Serge, like during this COVID pandemic, right, we are easily distracted, and because we are not interacting with people and we are left to our own devices. And also I would like to ask what forms of digital content and learning activities should be suggested to enhance the digital student experience?
First of all, I hope that this is in the past, and that now every activity should be resumed in person and not by Zoom or by the internet. I think this experience has shown indeed that we need the personal contact. Not only we talked about the importance of the human relationship in medicine, but I think it's also very important in education and in training. The personal contact with the students is something very important. And so I believe that classes by Zoom is something which should be as much as possible avoided. It's when it's necessary, of course, it's better than nothing. But as you said, it induces students to be left alone, to be cut from discussion with their colleagues and with their friends, and it misses a very important part of the human contact, which is important for education. So, I know in France, the students have suffered a lot. There's a generation of students who have spent 1 or 2 years without without going to school, without going to universities, and they have suffered a lot by this, not only at the economical level, because some of them were in very bad economical situations, but also just for the training conditions. And I hope this will not happen again soon, and that we'll be able to protect ourselves against that. And I know that France is not the worst country, because in France we have resumed direct education in high school earlier than in many other countries of the world. And I think our government was right to do that, because if you balance the benefits and the risks, the risk of losing a generation of students to having them be exposed to very depressing conditions is something which has to be taken into account as much as the risk of being contaminated by the illness itself.
I mean, the spontaneous interactions give so much, and sometimes that's really hard to recapitulate with an online format. You know, the sidebars, sort of the things that just come up, the unexpected. That's much, much harder, and we learn a lot from those kinds of exchanges as well. We can't underestimate that. Let me let Mike back in, just because I know we have about 15 minutes left, guys. And so anything we say now should be pretty concise. So Mike, go ahead.
Thanks, Julene. This is just, I would just like to raise this to everybody, wherein we know that EQ and IQ there's a debate if it can be passed on to children. But my question here is, can our dependence to technology or artificial intelligence could affect the cognitive or neurodevelopment of babies prior to conception? Like, will there be a chance, or will there be, would it be possible that it will also affect the development of babies? So anybody can answer, or maybe you can give your comment. Thank you.
Well, is your question related to the influence of artificial intelligence on preconception?
Yeah.
So like an epigenetic kind of phenomenon. It could influence the epigenome.
Yes.
That's a big question. So Serge, I guess what parents are doing preconception and how that affects the offspring. And I don't know, that's a complex question. I mean, somebody should actually try to study that.
Yeah. Jolene, I think you can answer better than me.
I mean, that's very interesting. The control experiment's hard to do, right? So, but all of these things influence, so what you do, what you eat, how you think, all of these things somehow contribute to this. But Mike, it's thought-provoking, very thought-provoking question. I don't think there's an answer for that one. Maybe, okay, Wharton you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, just a quick comment. Like, we see a decline for very, very direct observation, we see a decline in birth rates in Japan. And Japan was the first nation to really adopt robotics and internet at a very wide scale. So even not just, vertical gene transfer, but just on the notion of birth rates, internet already has a very direct impact on our population.
Okay, all right. So that's one way. And Annie, I want to get you in again too, because we have only heard from you once here. So.
Thank you. So I want to make a quick comments about the digital AI. So one more point why AI will never replace the doctors is the communication between doctor and patient. Like, humans have empathy and AI don't. Patients will be more comfortable if they share their medical conditions with someone who asks with empathy compared to answering to a machine. And this communication also may obtain more complete information, thus enhancing the prospect of a more accurate diagnosis. And a good communication between doctor and patient will also improve the adherence to treatment plans that benefits long-term health. And actually, I want to comment about the second topic is about the use of internet in children. This is a very interesting topic, and I see a lot of children are not only become the victim of cybercrime, but sometimes some children can leave harsh comments on social media. I think it might because they are exposed to social media since early age when they still cannot filter the information they receive, so it may lead to the aggressive behavior on the social media. And it's sometimes it is neglected like by the parents and by the government, like the children are forgiven and not giving any yeah, there are no regulations or laws about this. So I want to know what's your opinion about this. Should the children be given some punishments or something, or it's just they can be forgiven? Thank you.
Hey, Serge, so how do you control for that?
I think it's a very important issue. The fact that children are sometimes propagating hatred, insults, bullying other children because they are not sensitive enough to other people. And I think this is part of the problem. If they are exposed too early to the virtual world, they lose contact with reality, they lose contact, and they are not able to build the humanity in the way they should. So
the empathy.
Yes, I think they should not be punished when they are young because they don't know what they are doing, but it is a part of education. They should be controlled and they should be explained that the other people they are talking about are people, and they should learn to exercise their empathy and to build up their empathy. And I think it is the same issue as the one we discussed before, to build one's personality, to build one's relationship with others, to build links with other people. You need to be exposed to real people, not through screens and not through the internet. So it's again the same issue. And I think the responsibility is that of the parents. They should not punish without discussing and without explaining to the children what's going on.
Let's see, is it Akshay again?
So Serge, it might sound like a personal question, but during your life while becoming a physicist, did you at any time felt that there were places where social accountability should have been taught? Because I, for one, feel that social accountability is something that has been hurt due to the rapid digitalization in the past few years. And what is your point of view in this regard? And lastly, I just have one comment that children imitate what they experience. And it's about time we realize that we do things that we want them to imitate.
You talked about social responsibilities, the fact that we are citizens and that we have to not only to have rights, but also to have duties in the society we are living in. I think it's a very important part of education. Education should teach children how to see the world around them, to see early on what is right and what is wrong when you live in a society, to learn respect, to learn how to respect other people, to learn how to build one's own freedom of mind. And this is part of a very important part of education. It's something which always existed. It was an important issue before the social media and before the digital world. The fact that you have to, the role of education, I think, in a well-developed society is to train children to become responsible citizens, to be able to make their own judgment, to be able, when they are asked to vote later on, to vote according to what they think is right and not to be influenced or manipulated, to be able to recognize what is an opinion from what is a reality, to be able to separate fake news from facts, from real facts. This is the essential part of education. And if education is successful, then this social responsibility would be realized for all the citizens. But I know it's a big problem, and I know it's a problem which all societies have to face. because when you have economical problems, when a lot of people feel that they're excluded from the global market, they try to protect themselves to make some kind of bubbles. And this happens on the internet, to have people who share their own opinions inside a very close circle, and then they are separated from the rest, and then the social responsibility of these people is jeopardized because of this. I think there are good things in the global world. One of the good things that it may open all humanity to the same values, but for that we have to be able to protect yourself against the evils that we have been discussing in this session. And I think we covered a lot of topics, and I am glad that on most of these topics we seem to agree with each other, in spite of the fact that we live in very different parts of the world. And I think this gives me some hope that we will try together to find solutions to some of these issues, which are very serious issues, I think.
Listen, we have time for one more comment question from Wharton, and then I'm going to ask Serge to just give some more reflections and kind of continue on. So Wharton, we'll let you in with one more point here, and then we'll come to conclusion.
Actually, my question was inspired by your earlier comment on, interstitial glucose monitoring in children, right? So it raises the point of Internet of Things. We are increasingly living in a world where different devices and different things are giving more data to for us to analyze and for us to use, right? It is the diabetologist's dream to know every single meal and every kind of exercise that our patient does, right? So, Serge, what is your opinion on how do we integrate different parts of life to data and also to digitalization in general? And where should we draw the threshold in using these things?
I think the more data you can gather, for example, on health issues in biology is very important, essential. But of course, this should be done in an anonymous way, and the privacy of everybody should be absolutely protected. And I'm sure that that's the basic of the medical ethics. But the more information you get is the better, and artificial intelligence gives enormous power to help doctors to achieve a diagnosis. But as has been said before, I think nothing will replace the interaction with the human, with the doctor, with the patient. One of the previous person intervened talking about empathy. Empathy is absolutely essential. Now you have some people who might say that maybe one day artificial intelligence will be able of empathy, but then it's a very deep question. Will artificial intelligence be able to achieve some consciousness? And of course, if this happens, it would open abyssal consequences for what being a human being means. And I don't believe that. I think that human connection and human empathy will survive. And that's my hope, that the civilization and the mankind needs these kind of values, essential values.
I think, yeah, that's certainly what makes us really unique from all other life forms. So let's just come to a final point. Serge, you and I had a discussion earlier. Any final words that you want to share with us, your thoughts? We talked about a lot of different things related to, digital well-being, all the way from healthcare to education, philosophical aspects as well. But anything from the dialogue that really struck you, Serge, that you're going to hold on to?
First of all, I would like to say that we criticized a lot the digital world for all the evils and all the dangers it has. But I should also emphasize, maybe we did not do enough, the importance of it and all the positive points it has allowed us to share. The fact that we have a huge amount of information that we have access to. I don't go to a library anymore because I can get all the text I want on the internet. As you said, you have an enormous help when you want to write a paper, to publish a paper that we did not have something like 20 or 30 years ago. But as we said, this goes with risks. In fact, look at the difference between what is reading a book, the way we read books in the Middle Ages, alone in front of a piece of paper, able to develop our own thoughts without any interference from the outside world. I think it's a deep way of to read a book, and the deep advantage, the deep quality of literature in general. What literature is that you are connecting yourself alone with the author who may have written hundreds of thousands of years ago. When you read something on the internet, you are all the time distracted. You get advertisement on one side of the screen. You get solicited by pictures, by images. You can interact with the text. You can paste the text elsewhere, which is a way of being distracted. And all this changes completely your connection with what reading means. And I think we have to be careful about that. We have to keep this very unique connection we have with ourselves when we get access to outside information. And so I think it's an important point. And I think we have to also to be able to protect ourselves from this huge acceleration of the flow of information. We have to control it. We have to not to be overwhelmed by it. We have to be able to protect ourselves from it and to protect our children from it. So it's all is summarized by what it means to have a moderate connection with the internet. And this moderation is, I think, very, very important.
Well, thank you for that, Serge. And this was really a great discussion and dialogue. I certainly appreciated all the perspectives from all of you. I mean, that's the beauty of this, that we can take some of these really complex, contentious issues and from many different perspectives, have a discussion around the positives, the negatives, the challenges, the opportunities. And that's really fulfilling. So with that, I want to thank you all for your input and your time. Serge, particularly you as well. You were on the hot seat. It was really a lot of fun to learn from you. I really appreciate your perspectives as well.
Thank you.
With that, yeah, thank you very much, everybody. A big round of applause to you all, and wishing you all great successes, and continue to do all the good work that you are to make this world a better place. So thank you so much, everybody. Take care.